Fabulous. Well, thanks for that, Andy, and thanks to Kat. Even though I didn't get in to see Kat's session, hopefully everybody's been able to get into this one okay. Kat's amazing. Always love to hear what she's got to say, so I'll be definitely watching the recording of that one back. But today I'm here for my second or third Sport Camp Saturday. I can't remember, actually. It's always a brilliant day, and there's always some really good content to learn from. This year I was struggling to think about what to talk about, so I thought I'd make it easy on myself and just talk about something that I know about, which is my own Innovator Academy project, which is a podcast. My podcast is called Learning Dust. We'll get onto that in a moment. But just for those of you who I don't know, there's loads of people in here who I do know, which is lovely to see. So thank you very much for joining me. For those who I don't know and for those watching back, as I said, my name's Dave. I was part of the London 19 cohort, which is a fabulous experience for me and for everybody who got to make me, let's be honest. But off the back of that cohort, I spent the time looking into student voice and things like that and did my little innovator project around that. And that kind of ran its course. So I pivoted, and I've been having lots of conversations about how technical staff and teachers and school leaders work together. So I decided to make a podcast about it rather than have to have the same conversations over and over again. So here we are, 3 years later, and we're about to go into our fourth series of the Learning Dust podcast. So it's been quite a learning experience. So I thought I'd try and share some of the lessons that I learned with you guys. So we're going to cover today different elements of podcasting. Like I say, here's details of Learning Dust. Oh, look, it's like what's on my t-shirt. It's almost like I've done some branding. Yeah, we'll talk about that later as well. But as I say, Learning Dust focuses on communication, relationships, and empathy. Those are the topics that really come out when I speak to my guests on Learning Dust. So yeah, if you're not already aware of Learning Dust, please check it out. If you like it, tell your friends. If you don't tell anybody. Tell me, actually. Feedback's always good. So it'd be great to see some of you as listeners to the podcast as well. So here we go then with the session. So the first thing that we need to think about when we're deciding to release a podcast, it's all about the planning. So what is the planning that we can do to make your podcast a reasonably successful or enjoyable experience for you as the host, and also for your audience? So obviously the first thing that we need is an idea. So what is your podcast going to be about? We all have things that we are passionate about. We all have things that we feel we have a message to share about. So why not do it? I mean, podcasting since lockdown has become massively popular. Before that, when I first started it was a bit more niche and a bit more geeky, I think. But I think the tools and the platforms and the concepts around it have become so much easier that every man and his dog are throwing podcasts out now there. So it's an easy enough thing to do. But the key things that you need, these three things on the slide: you need your idea, you need an audience, and you need some content. So you've got to build all three of those things. The hardest one, I think, obviously, is the content. Once you've got your idea, that unlocks everything else. Then we've got to get it to an audience, which we'll talk about later on. But the key thing taking you through this every day, every week, whatever frequency you release upon, is you've got to have that content. Now, it may be that your idea is something that you've got a lot of content to deliver on anyway. Obviously, we're in the educator community, so lots of these ideas may be around education. They may be around what you're doing in class. And I know that a lot of innovators and a lot of Googlers and a lot of people, even the muggles, are hosting podcasts with their children. They're getting the children in the class to create their content and to share that, give that real world audience to their work and to their ideas. So have your idea, build your audience, and get your content out. It's simple. Sounds simple, doesn't it? It does take a little bit more work than that, though, unfortunately. Starting off, though, we have to start off with our recording. So you've got your idea, and you now need to turn it from in your head to on your computer. So what do we do to record it? Well, there's lots and lots of different platforms that you can use. Anchor is the Spotify sort of self-hosted, self created tool that they will allow you. You can literally pick up your phone, download Anchor or go to anchor.fm and start recording your podcast. And it will take you through every single step from recording to hosting to publishing and pushing out to different platforms. So that's a really great tool if you've never podcasted before and you think you'd really like to give this a go, then that will be my suggestion for the first thing that you try. So that's a really good tool. Google Meet. We all know how to use Google Meet. We're all on one now. So that was a tool that I decided to use. I've got faith in Google technologies. I know that they work. I've got access to them through work. So even now we're looking at the recording, you've got to have the right license, the Google Plus license, or the other licenses, which Andy will no doubt jump in and tell me that I'm wrong about if that's not the case. But I think it's the teaching and learning license. That allows you to record your Google Meet. And that's what I do for Learning Dust. I meet with my guests via a Google Meet, we record the session, and then I process it using Soundtrap. So it doesn't need to be complicated. You can keep this nice and simple. Stick with the technologies that you know, and you'll find life much easier. The other thing that people tend to use a lot of is Audacity. So Audacity has been around for donkey's years. It's a piece of software that runs predominantly on PCs, and it allows you to record audio from different channels and to edit it afterwards as well, which is another important part of your podcast experience. Some presenters will decide just to release the material as is. To be honest, I'm quite jealous of those people because they manage to just do the recording and then the job is done for them. So I would seriously consider whether that's something that works for you. For me, I like to edit things after the recording as well. So like I say, I use Soundtrap for that purpose. It's free. The version that I use is anyway. It's nice and intuitive. It's something that I'd used before in education anyway. So that's something else that you might want to consider. And then there's, when we recorded one of our episodes of Learning Dust, we spoke with Michael Bodeker, who is the CEO of a company called Labster. And he actually introduced me to this during my own podcast. This is a piece of software or a platform called Zencaster. And Zencaster works really well because one of the few issues that I've had with Google Meet is that on occasion, if your internet connection isn't great, then you can drop out and your audio can drop out. And in the final recording, that can be a bit of a challenge to edit. What Zencaster does, it records everybody on the meeting's audio locally, and then kind of magically in the background uploads them the proper recordings to their cloud at the end of the session. So you end up with if you've got 3 people on the meeting, you'll end up with 3 channels of sound plus a video for you to go back and look at. So Zencaster is really good. Some of these platforms are paid, some of them are free to use, most of them are free, but Zencaster, there is a small charge for it. I think I'm probably going to move to using this, or at least try it out for a couple of episodes in the next series of Learning Dust. So that's your recording elements that you need to go on to. After that, you need, once you've got your content and you've polished it up, you've edited it, or decided that you're just going to push it out, don't really care about all the ums and ahs, which tends to be what I do. I have a rule when I'm editing of deleting every other because it tends to be a bit onerous myself, and I've just done it then. I'm aware of it. I can see myself doing it. But as a presenter, you tend to drop in the little bits of and the filler words that doesn't sound too great in the final edit. Your guests will also be doing some of that, some more than others, and it's quite a habit to try and get rid of both during the presentation and during the edit. But once you've got your content, I can see I'm calling myself out now. I'm doing the all the time. Once you've got the content, you need somewhere to host it. So hosting is exactly what it says on the tin. It's sticking your file somewhere on the internet so that other people can download and listen to your podcast. So you need the location. You can get the platforms to do this for you that will take care of the hosting, so they'll hold your files, but they will also push through those files to podcasting platforms. So the distribution element is taken care of as well. There is a cost to this normally. Most hosting platforms will have a cost. It's just like web hosting. You will pay a certain amount of money for your web hosting, for your website, and it's exactly the same for your podcast content. The other thing that a good host will give you, though, is some analytics in terms of the number of listens that you're getting, the number of downloads, the geographic location of those downloads. That's quite interesting to look and see that this week we've had 37 new listeners in India that we didn't really know about. So there's obviously something that's going on over in that part of the world where, you know, word of mouth is spreading the message about our podcast. So that's an interesting element to look at. And for those people who do look into monetization, I mean, it's not something that I've ever done with our podcast. My podcast is a labor of love. It's a passion project. So there's nothing that I've done to try and monetize my podcast. But if you did want to monetize your podcast, those analytics are what your sponsors are going to be looking for to prove that they're getting out to the audience that is A, relevant, and B, sizable enough for them. After that, like I say, your host will often publish that data, and it will publish it to all kinds of areas. You've got all the common podcasting platforms, the obvious ones: Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Google Podcasts, Amazon are doing it as well now. They relaunched, I think, last year their podcast selection, and that's getting quite some traction now. We're seeing quite a lot of listens come through there. So it's about then getting the word out from your host to these services so that your podcast is listed. And it's all done normally through the same platform. For Learning Dust, we use a platform called Libsyn. And as part of releasing a new episode, I will put some information into Libsyn about the episodes. I will upload a placeholder image. I will upload the content, the audio file, and then Libsyn does everything else. It pushes out to all these different podcasting platforms, and it also pushes out to social media and updates of what's coming out and when. So that's a useful little tool, is to use Libsyn. After you've published it, you've created your content, you've uploaded it, you've published it, and nobody's going to listen. So you've got to do the marketing side of it as well. That can be done at any point and is an ongoing thing that you need to do. It's something that I really struggle with. I'm not a massive self-promoter. I will talk to anybody. I will talk until the cows come home. That's not a problem. But self-promoting is something that I find quite difficult. So I know that I can get better at that with Learning Dust. And it's something that I'm setting myself a goal of for the next series, to try and make sure that I market it better. But some of the elements that you need to consider when you're doing this: create yourself a brand guidelines document. So that will be something that details your color schemes. It will detail the font that you use when you're putting things out relating to your podcast. It will have standardized templates for things, different logos, so on and so forth. And all your design elements come together. Stick your name on a t-shirt and make it on your t-shirt so it's high enough that when you're on a Google Meet or any kind of Zoom type meeting, that it can be read. And make sure you position your camera accordingly when you do this. The first t-shirt I created for this, my logo was kind of more in the middle of my chest rather than sitting up high. And when I went onto a Google Meet, I was having to sit really far back so that people could see my logo. So that's another little tip that I've picked up. In terms of creating merchandise and things like that, I use a company called Sticker Mule. Now, Sticker Mule are great because they have regular promotions whereby the 1 week they will discount sticky tape, another week they'll discount coasters, another week they'll discount t-shirts. Brilliant. I want a t-shirt. I'm going to wait till that week comes around, and I'm going to get my t-shirt for $7 or £8 or whatever it is nowadays. Probably more pounds than it is dollars given the exchange rates these days. But that's something else to be aware of. Look at somewhere that you can get reliable, good quality merch from. Create what you want, what you can afford. Again, for me, everything that I do is self-funded, so it all comes out of my pocket. So I don't do too much of that. My Learning Dust pin badges are very exclusive, and I know that there's at least one person on this call who either has one or is entitled to one of those. So shout out to Georgina for that. But I don't just make hundreds and thousands of them and distribute them everywhere, because I can't afford to do that, because it's coming straight out to my wages, and my wife likes to spend those for me rather than my podcast. So there we go. But yeah, think about getting that message out to potential listeners. And Canva is another platform that I use to create all of my little assets that go out with the podcast. And that really, from start to finish, is it. I'm just going to use the last couple of minutes just to demonstrate some of the technologies that I've mentioned today. So I'm just going to present my screen now instead of this slide. Bear with me one sec. So just so we can see what it looks like, going into Libsyn. So Libsyn has got a new version that's just about to launch. The original version is slightly dated in its look, but we can go in there, we can go to content, I can go to add new episodes, and when it loads, if it loads, it doesn't want to load. It just basically takes me through as a wizard to create the information that I want to upload. So that's Libsyn. As I've said, Canva is another brilliant one. So this is the little image that I put out with each of the episodes that gets pushed out to Twitter and so on and so forth. And it's just something that I can use as a template, so there's consistency into my branding. And finally, of course, it would be remiss of me not to talk about my website. That's the other thing. I talked about the hosting of your files. You know, your website is also valuable. So I just use Google Sites for this, as you can see, and I list through to the recent episodes, link them all down, put some pertinent information in each one. And if Google Sites wanted to load today, you will be able to see that I actually have the podcast files hosted on there as well. It's not playing, so I'm going to come back to my window. I'm going to realize that I've actually finished early for once, and that never happens with me, and normally I'm really pushing on time. So I hope it's been useful for you. I'm more than happy to take any questions for the last 2 minutes if needs be. For those of you who are signing up to VIA 22 or a part of that, have an awesome time, make the most out of it. It will go so quickly, you will learn so much, and you will grow so much as individuals. A massive shout out to all the people who are involved in delivering that. And for those of you who are still with me, I think it's time now to jump over to the next session, which Masafumi is hosting. Is that right, Andy? About Japanese high school.
Yeah, so I'll pop the link in the chat for the next session for people who want to move on over.
Brilliant.
Dave, thank you very much.
Don't think there's any questions there, so I think I've gotten away with it, and everybody gets 2 minutes to go and grab a glass of water or a coffee or something before